Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Kris, and you're watching
Thanks! We Hate It with Alex and Kris. Oh, today's gonna be
a big one. Yep. This might be a long episode because we are covering from the dawn of film until the 1940s. Alex here, she had a little bit of trouble because, again, once you get back into certain time periods, there's less film to choose from. And in this point, there's so many classics that it's really hard to just outright say, yeah, I hate that.
Yeah,
I managed to find 5 I could do that for, but
I'm doing a little bit of a plot twist today. Thanks, I love it.
Right.
So it's
gonna be a yin and yang kind of show.
Yeah, because I mean, this is a little different than just the I have appreciation for it, and I genuinely I don't like it because it's slow moving or this and that. I didn't think any of the movies that I was trying to think of or the research I was doing.
And again, these are only movies we've seen too.
Right.
So
right. It's a lot of the films that I was looking through. I was I found none of these boring, and I found none of these weird or I couldn't find any qualms about it. And I don't know if it's just because of how I feel about horror cinema in general, or I really couldn't pinpoint it, because I know I've mentioned on here before, I grew up with a lot of old horror films, and I grew up with a lot of knowledge around me of really the birth of cinema as well, through my own research, and
Same.
then watching film directors like George Romero, and then going down the rabbit hole. I'd be on Google for 5 hours, just going down the rabbit hole of
God.
Okay, where did he get that inspiration
That's
from?
not fair. Google didn't exist when I was young. I had to get all of my movie trivia from my dad.
Well, to be fair,
and then Google later when it existed to see if he was right.
There you go. To be fair, this was later in my high school years, so when Google was actively,
Around,
available.
right.
Yeah, so it's okay, that was really the only way I could get my information at that point too. Sometimes I'd get a book here and there, as a kid, or I just would, or just sit and watch fucking movies all day. But going to I went to school for a lot of film theory and just filmmaking, audio, video, stuff like that. So it's I've taken many courses on things like that. I have a media certification, whatever the fuck that means. It's a piece of paper, whatever. It's a piece of paper that says I can point a camera at something.
So do you have 5 films that you love that you're gonna do?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have a couple in mind that I would really like to talk about for sure. So.
All right. So what's your top? We'll do top 5 favorite, and I'll do worst. So
okay.
What's your number 5 favorite movie from the dawn of film?
You know what? I'm gonna go real early. A Trip to the Moon.
I haven't seen that one.
George Millet, I think his name. He's a French filmmaker. He was the pioneer for special effects and a lot of set design and a lot of just set production, things like that, production design in general. It looked like a real theater production, but it was on film, and that was kind of a hard transition too in that time, because that movie, I believe, was made in the late 1800s. And that was a hard transition because, obviously you didn't have film. You only had theater. And of course, with a lot of theater actors, you had to have these grandiose gestures. You had to really move your body, and you had to speak loudly.
They gotta see in the back seats.
Yep, and you had to really be
emotive.
You had to be emotive, and you had to really be loud with your body movements. It's kind of hard to follow just because obviously it's a one of the first films ever fucking made. And they take spaceship to the moon. So they actually go to the moon because they want to meet, some people up there, apparently, or just really, it's a space adventure. They want to see what's up there, And a lot of it is just a lot of the set design and just a lot of the creative inspirations for it. It's a lot of just mystical. It was really the dawn of sci-fi. Honestly, it really was. It was the pioneer of it, where they went up to the moon, you know, of course, you know, nobody knew anything about the fucking moon and, you know, or like what it was like being in outer space.
70 years they would know what the moon looks like.
Right, you know, so of course they're on the moon, you know, there's gravity, of course, you know, and they're up there and they're walking around.
Do they have helmets?
No. No, they do not, you know.
Awesome.
And, you know, it was so cool. It was so cool to watch. And that was one of the first things that I watched in, like, the film history class that I took. And I was just so fascinated. I was like, you know, the fact that somebody was like, let me do, you know, all these grandiose things and put it on camera, but, like, you know, it didn't even look like a theater production. Like, it looked like it was made for the camera, you know?
He understood the medium.
He understood the assignment for sure, you know? And he, you know, he took that creativity and he, you know, he ran with it. And of course, one of the classic imagery for A Trip to the Moon is at the end, it shows the moon, but there's, like, somebody's face. So, like, the face is, like, painted as the moon. And there's, like, the rocket ship that's, like, stuck in the moon. And, you know, it's, like, stuck in his eye or whatever, you know, and he's kind of, like, looking around or whatever. That's the classic imagery of A Trip to the Moon. And I love watching it every once in a while, you know. Every once in a while, I'll bring it up, you know, and just be like, I just gotta refresh myself because it's just so fucking cool to see how somebody was, like, you know, that creative at the dawn of fucking cinema, you know? I mean, they took it and ran with it, so.
Without visionaries, nothing would get anywhere.
Exactly.
So this man saw what was happening, understood the difference in the medium, and adjusted.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. So I highly recommend giving it a watch. It's only, like, I think, like, 20 minutes.
Yeah, as are a lot of films back then.
Yep, so it's a staple. It's so cool to watch, especially for the time. One of the first films ever made. It's the coolest fucking thing. But then again, I'm a film nerd, so of course it's going to be cool to me.
All right, well, let's switch to what we hate.
Let's go.
All right, so my number 5 worst horror movie from the dawn of time. The Corpse Vanishes from 1942.
Yes, I know this one.
Rotten Tomato audience score of 29%. Like most horror movies at the time in the 40s, it stars Bela Lugosi.
Yes. Yes.
My problem with this movie is it's clearly inspired by the tale of Elizabeth Bathory. Just make a movie about Elizabeth Bathory, you cowards. Like, that's what they should have done. But instead of a badass female serial killer who bathes in the blood of her victims to remain young, we instead get this story about this mad scientist or whatever who, on a bride's wedding day, he steals the brides and, like, pulls out adrenaline or some kind of glandular extract from them and injects it into his wife for her to keep her young. Which is somehow more disturbing than the Bathory story. Like, I don't know, it just, it loses the power, I guess, of what, of what the source material is. Because it's clearly the source material here.
Oh, sure.
Also, he's got a lab assistant who's a crazy old woman with 2 weird sons, one of whom I think is a little person. And then both her sons get killed. And so she, like, stabs the mad scientist. And he, like, turns around and, like, strangles her. And then they both die. Yeah, it's just...
All right.
I think it would have been better if they just made a movie about Elizabeth Bathory. It takes away, instead of giving us this cool, badass serial killer female, now it's this man who's doing it. And he's capturing these, like, it gives it a whole different tone.
It's like when a woman does it, it's interesting because all you hear about is men, you know?
Yeah. Well, so. It also gives a whole different tone to the story. And that's my problem with this movie is it's not as good as the source material.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
All right, so number 4 for your favorite
Number
movie.
4 for my favorite. I have to talk about Universal Monsters. Of course. So I'm going to go with Creature from the Black Lagoon. Obviously. You know.
It's a beautiful film.
It's gorgeous. You know, it's... The thing with Creature is that I think, like, I know something we kind of touched on in the last episode is it's very much an environmental metaphor.
Very
you know,
much.
going into, unknown territory or going into a place, for scientific research when really we all know it's just for greed and it's for, for social,
Right.
for social purposes.
Rarely is it to further science.
Yeah, there's always some sort of hidden agenda, and there's always, what's in it for me. It's always some sort of selfish, pursuing it in a selfish manner. So I think that's kind of why I vibe with it the most, is like, I'm very much an environmentalist, and I really like to, reduce the amount of waste that we produce, as much as possible. I like to follow a lot of environmental science news, and I'm really interested in things like that. So, being introduced to that as a kid, that was really kind of the starting point for me of like, whether I knew it or not at the time, obviously, because I was, 4 or 5, when I was watching this movie. But, it just shows, I think that was also one of the first times where, like, I actually felt for the monster.
Right.
I wasn't thinking of him as the bad guy at all. I mean, when he would, grab the girl or whatever, he was destroying the boat. Like, as a kid, I remember being like, hell yeah. Like, you did it,
Get him.
I mean, I loved it. Like, I sympathized for that monster because, they came in on his territory. That's his swamp,
Should've left him alone.
Exactly. And obviously, it was shown that, they weren't there to do scientific research. They were there just to fuck around and find out, and they did.
They found out.
They sure did, So, seeing that as a kid, I'm sure subconsciously, that must have planted a seed because, that movie's very important.
Yep.
In terms of a metaphor, for the environment.
And I feel like it's one of the first actually, like, cinematically pretty horror movies.
Yes. I 100% agree. That was really when they took, like, camera work and lighting. And,
very seriously.
Yep.
And it shows.
They used it as art, you know, and they understood the assignment.
In a different way, because one of the movies I have on my list is a German expressionist film. But the expressionist movement, in the teens, 20s, and 30s.
I was going to talk about that, yep.
Well, maybe we'll save it. But yeah, they used the camera and beauty and all that stuff too. So what I'm saying is The Creature from the Black Lagoon, I think, is the first one that made it mainstream. Where they're like, horror can be beautiful too. And so that's the distinction I wanted to make there. Yeah. Because I'm not saying it's the first pretty horror movie or the first horror movie that used lighting and all that stuff. I'm just saying it's the first one that kind of mainstreamed it and said, look, horror can be well shot and well made too.
It was a pioneer for the technical side of the beauty of horror.
Exactly.
All right.
So my number 4, hate it. Hate it movie. The Hands of Orlac. Or Orlac. I'm not even sure how you say it. And 1924 was when it was first made, but it was released in the U.S. And this is the one I was talking about, the Expressionism. But it was released in the U.S. in 1928. It's got a Rotten Audience score of 81%. So I am in the minority here, just to be forthcoming. This is an Austrian silent film from German Expressionist film director Robert Wiener. He's best known for Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yes.
This is the first my hands take on a life of their own film in that, like, niche genre of horror. What happens is there's a pianist and he gets in some kind of accident or something. He loses his hands, and his wife or girlfriend is like, please, to the surgeon, please do something. So they do a hand transplant, but the hands come from a recently killed serial killer.
Oh boy.
Right.
Here we go.
So you'd think this would be super interesting, but it turns out, because at one point he goes to his dad because he can't play the piano anymore, and he's sitting here driving himself mad, wondering if his hands are, because he's different and he thinks about killing or whatever. And the surgeon is even like, no, well, your hands don't, like, it's in your brain, dude. Like, your hands don't have brains. Like, it's not going to change your brain to have new hands. And I'm like, thank God they told him that. Like, duh. But in this little subgenre of movies like this, that doesn't matter. But he goes to his dad at one point to be like, I need money to pay my bills because I can't play the piano anymore to pay my bills. And the dad's like, no, because I'm a dick. And
Because I'm a dick.
right.
Valid.
I'm paraphrasing. So the dad turns up dead, and he's like, oh my God, did I kill him and not remember? What did my hands do? And turns out that it wasn't him. It was the serial killer had an accomplice who was trying to blackmail this guy, and he killed the dad, and he had made gloves with the serial killer's fingerprints on them. So it goes from like horror, like psychological horror kind of, to crime mystery, which I'm fine with. I love all those genres. My biggest complaint with this is that it's very slow moving. And I had seen this movie already way after I'd already seen other movies in this genre niche of My Hands Have a Life of Their Own. And I've seen it done better. So that's my problem with it. Yes, this is the first, and this is based off a book, by the way, by Maurice Bernard. So it's the first film in this little tiny subgenre, but I don't think it's the best one. Personally, Idle Hands is my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But there, like I said, there's other films, and they've, I feel like, done it better in a more interesting way than this one. And I also don't like the bait and switch of like, is it serial killer hands? No,
Yeah.
he secretly got an accomplice, and
Right.
like it does. It feels like a bait and switch a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I can totally see that. I've never seen it, but I know of it, and I know, the kind of the basic premise, but I really have nothing to bounce off of that. I don't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, you said you wanted to talk about expressionism.
Yes, I do. So German expressionism that's really the dawn of the genre. Mm-hmm. It really, really is. Like, you cannot argue that. German expressionism is very, very important when it comes to not only like the stories, and the scripts and things like that, but set design, production design, feel,
it makes the camera part of the process.
Right. This is literally like if Tim Burton existed in, like this time period, I promise you he would have made many German expressionism films.
Right.
And I, again, circling back, I have no doubt that's where he got
a lot of
most of his inspiration
Guillermo
from.
del Toro too, probably.
Yep. So, it's so important to understand and recognize that German expressionism is the pioneer, and it is the dawn of horror cinema.
And gorgeous movies.
Oh, 100%. And just, you didn't really see a lot of those themes in a lot of theater productions. So these were like brand new ideas. Like, these were ideas where, these directors were manifesting like these really dark stories. And yeah, dark stories and horror stories have existed since the dawn of time. Absolutely. But like, you never really saw it on camera or like actually acted out a whole lot. You saw it in books, but that was it.
Right. And the beauty of these movies is they're the first ones to, like Nosferatu, to use light and shadow almost as another character.
Yes.
To create this ambiance and this terror that they needed you to feel for these movies. So yeah, a lot of playing with the light and the shadow, because it's black and white back then.
Of course.
And it's just very artistic. It's a very artistic movement. And I think some of the best silent films have come out of German expressionism.
Hands down. And, and it's not necessarily, you look at films, like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, and those have very, similar themes to it, and then you had movies, this is my number 3.
All right, it's a good segue.
Yeah, this is my number 3. You have movies like Metropolis. And I believe that was made in like the early 1920s. Metropolis is very much a play off of German expressionism. And it was really, it used a lot of Art Deco themes, which was very popular, obviously in the 1920s. Metropolis, you had, like just like these big grandeur, like the city, like it's all the Art Deco type theme, the straight lines, the symmetry, geometric type feel for it, very clean. very sleek looking. So it was really fun to see on screen. And then you have, of course, the robot woman,
Right.
at the end, where her costume and just her imagery is classic. It's so well done and beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Beautiful to look at.
Art.
What a film, you guys. Like, that is probably arguably, again, right up there with it's one of my favorites. I know it's a silent film.
It is a work of art.
Yeah, it's a silent film. I mean, it's phenomenal. Like, I can't give it enough praise, and I can't give it enough.
Definitely seek this one out and watch it.
Please, yeah. Like, I can't give this one enough props for what they did, because it combined horror and art, like popular mainstream art style of the day,
and architecture,
which didn't. Again, since they were trying to still kind of figure out what film was artistically,
right.
The fact that they just went that route was genius, and that was a segue to get more audiences into, looking at
because a lot of films up to that point too were adapting books or plays,
right.
or so it was set in certain time periods. So yeah, this one was a present day movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Present day,
Right. I got you. Yeah, it's it's beautiful. Like, you would be doing yourself, especially if you're, if you're thinking about getting into filmmaking, and you want to venture into independent filmmaking and do your research, go to school for it. I know that a lot of like the younger generation now, they didn't obviously grow up with, older films and even stuff from like the 90s, I mean, they, you know what I mean, which I feel so old saying that, but they grew up with early 2000s,
right.
mid early 2000s,
all they know is Saw.
Right, all they know is Saw, and all they know, I mean, like Cabin in the Woods, I mean,
Paranormal Activity,
right, a lot of the recent ones. And I'm telling you right now, you are really doing yourself a disservice by not watching old films. You are really hurting yourself.
And same goes if you're just sticking to like, I only watch Halloween and Chucky and Freddy, and you stick to the mainstream.
Yep.
Definitely go outside the mainstream, because that's where a lot of the
Sure.
really great horror is found.
And even if you're not like you said, kind of playing off of that, if you're only into like the gore aspect, still, you absolutely need to watch, because a lot of the camera work and the lighting, that's going to work just as well with gore and with like grindhouse themed films, because even a lot of grindhouse films, they drew inspiration from those old movies too. You are really doing yourself a disservice by not looking into Universal monsters, Metropolis, Nosferatu, creature features from the 50s. Like, you are only
Check
hurting
them all
yourself.
Out.
Yeah.
Check them all out.
So please do it. Please. It's so
All right.
important. It's so important. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I gush. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. All right, so my number 3 worst hated movie from the dawn of time is a short horror comedy film from Universal. It's called Boo, with an exclamation point.
Oh.
It's from 1932, and there is no Rotten Tomatoes score. It doesn't exist on Rotten Tomatoes. And again, it's a short, and it has 2 male leads who very much want to be Abbott and Costello before Abbott and Costello were a thing. But they are not. Abbott and Costello came along and did it better.
Absolutely. Abbott and Costello are life.
Right. So what this movie does, whereas Abbott and Costello actually met Frankenstein and they had the actor there dressed up as Frankenstein, what this movie did was it took clips from Universal features that had already come out, Dracula, Frankenstein, and it made skits around these clips. So, like, for example, there was one, but for some reason they didn't use Dracula, they used Nosferatu, which Universal had acquired the rights for that for a short period of time. But they used Nosferatu. But, for example, one of the skits was Dracula needs to do his taxes or some shit like that.
Oh, God.
Right. And so they had actors, and they were in the short, and they acted around these clips from these movies. Now, I don't know if I just don't get 1930s comedy. I think I do because I like His Girl Friday. You know, like I like old movies. It's just I didn't find this movie funny in the way that they intended anyway.
Yeah.
Not in the way they intended. But the most interesting thing about this and why I wanted to include it, because this one has a little bit of movie history in it. There's an old movie called The Cat Creeps. And supposedly it was a good movie, but it's considered a lost film now. There's nothing except for in Boo. They use a clip from this movie, and it's the only existing footage left from The Cat Creeps.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's an interesting thing about this. But otherwise, like I said, it's the beginning of those types of Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and meet the monsters and all that stuff. That's
Invisible
what this
Man
is.
And the Mummy.
Exactly. And so, like I said, yes, this is the first, but it was done better later. All right, so you're number 2 for liking it.
So I want to talk about Phantom of the Opera. I really love...
It's not my favorite version.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's nobody's favorite version. Let's be real. It really isn't. But the reason why I love it so much is because, obviously, it started as a book. It all started as a book. You know? So you have a music-based story.
Right.
And there wasn't any music that was like really created.
Right, the musical didn't exist yet.
It did not exist. It didn't exist until, I want to say it was like the 80s or 90s, I want to say. Because obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber took it over and was like, yo, you know, like, this would be a banging musical, and he was correct. And Phantom of the Opera is like, it's like one of my favorite musicals of all time. So I think that's why I'm so drawn, and I hold Phantom of the Opera like so close to my heart, is because, you know, that was probably one of the first times that, you know, they took something, you know, like something as cool as, you know, music and like the theater, you know, and like going to the opera, you know, so they were touching on that aspect, but putting it in cinema. You know,
classy, but make it horror.
Basically, you know, because everybody went to the opera, you know, in France, of course, you know, I mean, really anywhere, you know, anywhere there was an opera house, you know, you went. So
no TV.
To take so to take that aspect of it, where it's like, yeah, you know, remember going to the opera, you know, and remember going to, you know, theaters and stuff.
Creepy dudes live in the basement.
That's basically what they were trying to pioneer, where it's like they were taking that aspect of, you know, everybody likes to see musical acts and everybody likes to see that stuff, and then, you know, make a movie where it's like, oh, well, what if one of the, you know, the staples of the cast, you know, got into some weird shit, you know, with somebody who lived
a weird stalker with a weird face.
Exactly. So I think that was really, really interesting that they took that and they were like, yeah, because this is what people are most familiar with still, you know, and incorporate that in cinema. And like I said, also, I'm very particular to Phantom of the Opera, like the musical and everything like that. So of course,
this wasn't the Lon Chaney one.
Yes, it is.
It is, okay.
Yep. This is Lon Chaney, like not Lon Chaney Jr., but Lon Chaney. Because Lon Chaney Jr. played the Wolfman. That's what he's most popular in. So he followed in his dad's footsteps, which is cool. Like in the horror realm, of course.
You got it. But let's be clear, for those who may not know, in early silent films, they also didn't come with music. What it was is you went to the theater, and the theater had hired someone to play the music that was written to go with the movie. And it's a really interesting way to watch those old movies. I'm from Chicago, born in Chicago. We used to go to the Museum of Science and Industry all the time because I was that kind of nerd as a kid.
I love the Museum of Science
and
and Industry.
they have this section called the Streets of Yesterday or whatever. And they have an old theater there, and you go in, and they would play the same Charlie Chaplin movie every time, but I loved going, and I would sit there and watch it, and they didn't have a person there, but they had a player piano, and so you get to experience watching a silent movie the way that it was back then, and you're sitting there, and the music's there in the room with you while the film is playing, and it's really an interesting way to experience these silent films, and I wish there was a way to, like, do that at home where like
oh sure
it came like silent movies, the DVD, when they put them on DVD, it comes with like a soundtrack too that you play on your radio while you're watching the movie or something like that.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
but yeah,
it's a great experience.
It is. It really is. All right, so my number 2 for No Thanks, I Hate It. Zombies on Broadway. Have you seen this?
I've seen bits and pieces of it. Yeah.
Guys. Okay, so this is from 1945. It's also called Loonies on Broadway in the UK, just for FYI. The Rotten Tomato audience score is 32%. It's a horror comedy, and so it's not zombies as we know them today. It's like the old like white zombie where you put them under a spell and that sort
like
of
the
thing.
voodoo type.
Right. It's not
vibe.
I rose from the dead, zombie. This is another one that again, and this is after Abbott and Costello's already been around, but they want to be Abbott and Costello and they're not. The leads are not nowhere near that great at comedy or timing at all.
Yeah.
So here's it's about these guys, and there's a nightclub opening on Friday the 13th, and they assured the nightclub owner, who's like a mob boss or something, that they could get him a real zombie for this club opeing. And then they're unable to or whatever.
You're just
and
asking for trouble.
They're threatened with death, so they're like, we gotta find a zombie.
That's what you get for fucking with. You fucked around and found out, man. That's what you get with messing with a mobster.
So, again, like all movies in the 30s and 40s, Bela Lugosi's in this. And his character is someone who apparently makes zombies. Yeah. Yeah. It all sounds like it should be kind of entertaining, and it's just not.
Poor execution.
It's poor execution. There is a little monkey in it. He is the best part of this movie.
Oh,
it's 1945, and like I said, it's a horror comedy that wants to be another Abbott and Costello movie, and is just not.
Sorry.
All right, so you're number 1.
My number 1 of thanks. I love it. Oh God, this movie. To just give it a moment of silence because of how beautiful it is. I have to talk about Todd Browning's Freaks.
I love that movie.
I have to talk about it.
One of us.
One of us. Who got me? Who got me? Yes. Oh my gosh. This movie is
amazing.
Oh my God. Like, and people need to understand, again, this is an explanation, not an excuse. Of course, at the time this was made, obviously you look back and you're like, wow, that's exploiting the hell out of these people.
Right.
Which...
But that's what freak shows existed to do anyway.
Yeah, and that's what it was actually trying to... That was the point they were trying to get across. Is
this movie is I don't believe this movie is exploitation of them. I think this movie exposes the exploitation of them.
That is exactly what I was going to say. Is that was the point that they were trying to get across, where it's like they are being exploited in more than just look at the deformities.
Right.
They're being exploited, emotionally. Mentally, a lot of the situations that happen in this film is, to, like a bigger, a norm, I don't want to use the word normal, but like a standard, societal, woman falling in love with a little person, but not falling in love with them. She knows that he has tons of money, and it's, it's playing on those things where it's going deeper than the actual, like physical deformities, it's going to the emotional aspect of it and how, they were all using each other as, they were being used.
Yep. So,
it was exploiting just how shitty it was all around.
Yeah. No
you know what I'm saying? So when you have, I won't totally spoil it, but when you have, the freaks basically, the freaks, they fight back, where they're like, this is
defend themselves.
Right, exactly. Like because they hadn't had the chance to do that ever. So when they felt wrong, they're like, you know what? Especially for a couple of the characters who were just not necessarily physically deformed, they just had like a special talent. Like the strong man, or they had like a trapeze artist.
Right.
So like things like that where there was nothing strange about them. It was more of just an act. So it was the people who had the physical deformities getting back at the people who just had the talents, because they knew it was just all exploitative. And them, it's about them fighting back and all the heartbreak and emotional turmoil. And there's even a scene in there where it even shows like kind of the birth of the freak carnival of this specific carnival owner, where he just comes across them in like a little meadow forest. They were just kind of going through
living.
Yeah, and there was this lady who had a couple of kids around who were physically deformed, and had some issues, but she was just taking them out to play, because they didn't really get out a whole lot, and of course, the guy comes along and he saw an opportunity, to take them and exploit them. But this woman clearly just cared, she just really cared about him and had no interest, in making money off of something that these poor people couldn't help, so, there's so many elements and there's so many, honestly, so many good things about this film.
Yep.
There really, really is. And contrary to what people believe, like, oh, it's so exploitative. Like, it's actually not.
Because it's told from their point of view.
Right. Right.
So that's the difference. And I feel the same way about the 4th season of American Horror Story, Freak Show. Favorite.
So good.
But it's my favorite
season.
It's my favorite. Yeah. It's my favorite season. And again, it's told... They tell it. Ryan Murphy tells it through the eyes of the freaks. So that's why it doesn't feel as exploitive. And even in that show, the freaks talk about how much they like the movie Freaks and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that Ryan Murphy took it even further by saying, "Look, our freaks, they don't have to be good people to deserve to be, because they're not great people. They do bad things.
Yeah.
But nobody deserves to be exploited for something they can't help. Like, we choose whether or not we do good things or bad things. You can't help if you're born with no arms or anything like that.
Right.
So that it took it even a step further because Freaks is like the guy, again, he was rich, that's why she wanted him, and they had to almost be the perfect victim in order for it to be okay for them to fight back.
Yeah,
and so that's why I like Ryan Murphy's Freak Show season is he's like, look, they don't have to be the perfect victim to fight back. They can just say, we've had enough and fight back.
Sure.
And so, yeah, all that kind of stuff is I love that genre.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's very, I think it's a really important film to see, honestly. Like,
I have it on DVD.
Hell yeah. I think it's on HBO Max, and,
is it?
I think so. Stream it. Guys, it's worth it. It's only like 50 minutes. Right. It's like the perfect amount of time for a film, in my opinion. But it's amazing. And I gotta tell you, a lot of the, actually all of them, like all of the, people with deformities, they're amazing actors. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Like, guys, please.
Definitely see this movie.
Yeah, it's
film
it's in my
history.
List. Yep, it's in my list of my favorite movies of all
time. It does. It goes beyond horror to just plain old film history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So definitely see this movie.
Right. Yeah, and of course, I always love a good, like, exploitative, like, obviously, like, exploiting...
Fight back!
Right, like, exploiting the exploitative nature.
Right.
I love a good movie like that, and this movie does it perfectly.
Great, yeah.
And I won't spoil the end of it.
It's great,
because it's fucking awesome.
It's awesome.
It's so good, so watch it. Just watch it.
Definitely watch it.
Okay.
All right, so,
let's go.
Getting off that positive note, let's go back to We Hate It. Yeah. All right, so my number one, Thanks I Hate It, from the beginning of film, is a movie called Maniac from 1934. It's got a Rotten Audience Tomato score of 31%. And I want to note...
There was a Maniac from 1934?
Right. And I want to note that it's got a 31% audience score, 89% critic score. So that's one of the bigger discrepancies I've seen here. So clearly critics are seeing something that audiences are not, or vice versa.
Okay. One of those movies.
I didn't like it, so I'm with the audience. But it's an exploitation film from Dwayne Esper, who you may know him for Narcotic, with an exclamation point, or Marijuana. And he wrote Maniac with his wife, and it's a very loose adaptation of The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, which is my least favorite Edgar Allan Poe story.
Yeah.
So already this movie's not going to be hitting with me. And it also has hints of murders on Rue Morgue. So clearly inspired by Poe. However, what's really interesting is that this is the movie that's considered the first ever to hold the title of worst movie ever made. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep, all the way back to 1934. This was the first one to hold like the official "this is the worst movie ever made" title,
That's
and it
impressive.
Still shows up on lists. So it's about a guy named Don. He works for and then winds up killing this mad scientist and hides the body and takes over the scientist's life, basically. I think he puts on his glasses and is like, I'm him now.
That sounds awesome.
Right. So he winds up seeing one of the doctor's patients and injects him with like adrenaline or something that makes him like rage out. And he winds up attacking and violating a woman.
Uh-oh.
And so, yeah, the guy's wife comes to him and she's like, I know you're not really him and I'm going to blackmail you because you turned my husband into a SA zombie, you know?
Oh, God.
Right. So somehow Don manages to convince this woman to fight his wife instead. So these women start like fist fighting. Like, I don't know. What? Like, I can't help you. I don't know.
That does not make a lot of sense.
Right. The cops wind up showing up because they've got this neighbor that, like, raises cats or, like, breeds cats or something. And the neighbor, like, heard the fighting or whatever and called the cops. So the cops wind up showing up. And then they find the body of the real mad scientist. It's such a stupid movie, you guys. It's so stupid.
I didn't even know, because, like, obviously, the only Maniac I know is, the 1970s film and the remake with Elijah Wood. So those are the only two
completely
Maniacs.
different from this.
Completely different. And much better.
Right. Yeah,
from what this sounds like. Yeah.
I checked the Wikipedia and IMDb articles for this, and none of those are saying that the other Maniacs are inspired by this at all. So,
that's fine. That's fine, because this sounds like horseshit.
Yeah, it's real stupid,
like,
and it's bad acting on top of it with bad editing. It's bad.
Like, I was kind of on board with he kills a scientist and, this is me now.
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
like, I seriously think, if I'm remembering right, because I think I saw it in my film class. Like, I think if I remember right, like, he just literally put the dude's glasses on and was like, I'm him. Like,
oh shit! I was saying, like, I was kind of interested there, and then when you started explaining the rest of it, I was like, never mind.
It's ridiculous, right?
Never mind.
It's ridiculous.
So,
we gave you a lot of film history in this episode,
and I mean, and to be fair too, on that note, I implore you to do your own research and read a couple of books, maybe even take like a class or two online,
Oh
here
yeah,
and there.
they've got lots of those.
There's lots of different, like film theory books. A really great book I can recommend is like Men, Women, and Chainsaws.
I like Final Girls.
Yeah, and Final Girls too. I mean, those are a little bit more for like the the newer horror films.
I think Final Girls is from the 70s to the 90s because that's when it was written. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like looking at like the birth of cinema, like, and not necessarily just like horror cinema themed books from that time, I mean, like, just look into the dawn of cinema period, I mean, it's
interesting stuff.
There's a lot of interesting stuff, and
if you haven't watched Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, go do it. Please do it.
Please, they are staples in cinema history. So I implore you to do as much research as you can, for sure. It's such a great, rich history, and it's inspired a lot of amazing things in film.
Who knows what you'll find that could inspire you to be like, I'm going to make a film about this, or I'm going to write a book or a play or whatever, or paint a picture. This inspires, get your art on.
Please. We don't have enough of it. Please.
More art.
I agree.
All right, guys. So thanks for watching. We don't have a topic picked out now. We've made it all the way back, counted all the way back to Dawn of Film, so we'll have to have a little powwow here and come up with our next topics, because I have no idea.
Yeah. We'll have to think.
Stay tuned for that. It'll be a surprise next week.
Yeah. It'll be fun, I'm sure. We'll figure something out.
Right. So make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so that you get notified when we do come out with new episodes. And thanks for watching. Have a good night. Good fight.
And now, you will feel better.
Let me. Doctor, he seems to be getting worse instead of better. Stealing through my body. Creeping through my veins. Pouring in my blood. Oh, darts of fire in my brain. Stabbing me. Agony. I can't stand this torture, this torment. I can't stand it. I won't. What was in that hypo? Oh.